story that must be told from beginning to end.
Now, here's a little story I got to tell.
Here is a story about music.
Stories About Songs, Sha-key. Interviewing and trying to set up interviews can be a thankless and taxing experience. But for me, I just push forward because of the great moments that come from the other ones. It's like for all the ones that fall through or have challenges, you have those ones that you get to do, and it's like, this makes it always worth it to push forward, to do this continually. You know, when I was thinking about doing this episode, you know, I had a lot of great memories. But also, you know, I knew that I was connected with Sha-Keys still, you know, on Facebook, comment on posts, like posts back and forth. So loosely still connected. And so as I was just putting together, I was like, you know what this is for, right? This is the reason why we have this. So I hit Sha-Key up. And I was like, you know, you have a moment, kind of go over some of these memories and see if I'm forgetting anything or if you could add anything. It was perfect because I'm going to jump ahead of the story a little bit, because besides being a poet and MC, Sha-Key also had what is the first hip hop magazine on the internet, as far as we know. It may have been the first hip hop site on the internet, certainly one of the first, called Guillotine Hip Hop. And so for my connection from working with her on her debut record, I also ended up being the first time I ever wrote online was for that site. So that's another connection that, you know, ties all together with Sha-Key, me, and where this whole episode is trying to go. So it was a perfect timing, because when I reached out, Sha was like, I was just basically putting a prayer into the universe for me to find some, you know, like artifacts or some things about Guillotine Hip Hop, because it had mostly been lost. So I was such a nerd when the internet first came out, or when I first got on it, that I was printing a bunch of the pages. And so I had like 50 something pages of Guillotine that I had printed out. And then I scanned back in to my computer a couple of years ago. So I had them just there on a drive. And so I was able to send those to Sha-Key right when she was thinking about wanting stuff like that. So it kind of just worked out perfect. And this episode already has like connections to previous episodes to the Coup, because there was a whole connection between Anti-Pop Consortium and Sha-Key, and they were on the same label as the Coup, 75 Art for a time. And then it also connection to, you know, my work with Rage Promotions, because even though that wasn't like really financially successful, it was an important part of my journey. And so I spent a lot of time with record labels and chasing money I was supposed to get paid but never got paid for. But I also did some promotions for Lugz Boots, and they were one of the only places that would always pay on time and pay well. We had a really good deal. They were good at giving me like free shoes and winter coats, promotional items like keychains and stickers and all these things. So if you went to a hip hop party in the 90s in Chicago, you probably got something Lugz related from me. People still come up to me 20 years later being like, yo, you gave me I still got my Lugz keychain. So I was out there doing Lugz, and they were taking care of me. The people that I worked with there, they were all women, and the main person was Diana. And that was like, you know, in the record business, that wasn't something that I experienced. I only dealt with men in terms of like who was running a promotion team. The only time I talked to women pretty much at rap labels was a receptionist.
You write it down.
I ain't no damn secretary.
It wasn't common. I wasn't thinking about it that much then, but looking back, that's my memory of it for the most part. Promotions where I saw more women have presence, you know, in that world, street teams, running street teams, stuff like that, but not specifically at record labels. So working with Diana at Lugz, and at one point she was like, I have this friend of mine that works for a record label, and they just signed a hip hop artist, and they're looking for, you know, promoters. Would you, you know, be willing to talk to her or send a proposal? And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. So I sent a proposal for what I do in Chicago. And I believe the woman was Shantae Taylor. I couldn't remember the name, and Sha-Key couldn't remember for sure either. But I looked up some internet sleuthing, and I was like, yeah, this makes perfect sense. And then the picture, I'm like, yeah, I think that's who I remember. So I'm believing it's Shantae. So got her this proposal. She liked it, decided to hire me for the project, and the project was Sha-Key. And the first thing I worked was the Soulsville 12-inch single, which was the only 12-inch single for the record. And I started working for Imago. I kept notes of answer machine messages.
No one is available to take your call.
And so I kept notes of that. And so I found that when I got hired, it was in May of 94. So that must have been around the same time when this single was coming out. Then I worked the album. There's also a project through Imago, and a great experience. But that's how it connected, was through Diana at Lux. And so that experience at Imago was also different, because that was the first time now, contrary to what I said just a moment ago, this is the first time that I was working with a woman who was running a project. And I remember everyone I believe that I ever talked to at Imago was women. And I even went to the office once when I was in New York during this campaign, and it was a great experience. Office is a cool, this is a cool experience. They paid on time, no hassles. For me, it was a good experience. And so I got this impression, wow, when I'm working with women in these positions like that, the experience is always better and I get paid. And so I was looking for more experiences like that. And then I found those were like in the magazine world, like Sheena Lestover at Rap Pages, and then the team over at Flavor in Seattle. So I was finding that, more often as time went on. And so I got to work the Sha-Key record. And Imago was a label that was known more in the rock world. I never really heard of them before Diana mentioned it to me. But they, looking back, they had the Rollins band.
You think you're gonna live your life alone?
Amy Mann. Basshead was sort of like a pop rap. They use rap in the music with Basshead. Artists like that. If you heard of them or not, you probably got an idea that this wasn't a hip hop label at all. And so they assigned Sha-Key, and it makes sense because Sha-Key is also very clearly is hip hop, but you can hear all these other influences and this different. She's just very unique in the way she's approaching the vocal range and inflections and all these things, and it's engaging stories, visuals, sense of humor. It's all coming together really great in this album and all these songs. So when I was getting around to doing this, I was like, let me just catch up with Sha-Key and we have a quick conversation. And I asked, how did that even occur to get signed to Imago of all the labels at the time? And the story basically is they were doing things, doing shows, but labels weren't really looking for them. So it really was, Imago was the one that came asking. And there was a particular show where Sha-Key performed at the old knitting factory downstairs. It's a packed show. She had his full band. It had, members that went on to be part of the group Soul Coffin.
You get the ankles and I'll get the wrist. You get the ankles and I'll get the wrist. You get the ankles and I'll get the wrist.
But this band, her first full band she ever had, was called Rhythm Method. Some of the demos they made it as that group became songs on the debut album on Imago. And this night was a particularly great show, and it was videotaped. And the leader of the band, Danny Bloom, showed this videotape to Kate Hyman, who was the A&R of Imago. That led Kate to have interest and set up a showcase at CBGB's, which also wasn't a particular hip-hop spot.
CBGB's is proving ground for a lot of the punk/new wave groups.
That performance also went well, and that led to a deal with Imago around the spring of 93. And then I was working towards the album to get it done for 94. But pretty much as soon as the album was done, Kate, the A&R that brought her on, was let go. So that was already a start of a souring of the relationship with the label. One good thing that did happen was Sha-Key was able to get on the Lollapalooza tour as the crew that she was a part of, the Boom Poetic.
Lollapalooza. Here comes the coolest apparition this summer. Smashing Pumpkins, Beastie Boys, The Breeders, George Clinton, L7, plus mucho more. Between bands, look into the future down the Lollapalooza Superhighway, the online cyberlink that lets you talk long distance via computer. Lollapalooza 94, a hypnotic way to spend a hot spell. This MTV Lollapalooza tour report is brought to you by Apple.
So they went on this tour right around the time of her album coming out to promote it. You know, as far as what was happening to the label then, the person that came in to replace Kate didn't really believe in the project. So there was already, as soon as it dropped, you know, some like contention with the label. So it wasn't going well. And so not too long after it came out, it led to Sha-Key and Walter, who was Walter Mead, managing Sha-Key at the time. They go into this meeting to Imago, which was in the penthouse of the building across the street from Carnegie Hall, or next to Carnegie Hall. And, you know, and Sha-Key describes that every time they would go there, remember as the elevator door opens, you see like the receptionist desk, and there's always every week a different giant exotic plant on the desk. You know, so big you can barely see the receptionist. It's like this giant imposing plant. But this day, they're both so focused and angry, and they go in right direct, don't even notice the plant, what it is, go right into this meeting, speak what they got to say, you know, which is pretty much leads to them leaving the label and being done, the last time they're going to be in that office. But then on the way out, they notice that, ironically or fittingly, that the plant on the desk is a large cotton plant. And Sha-Key's like, she goes to Walter, like jokingly, like, I've never picked cotton before. I'm going to pick cotton from this plant. And as that was happening, this voice in Sha-Key's head was like, don't let yourself escape from one plantation to go to another. And so that's why she didn't look for another deal. She started to do things a different way from that point. So that was just like such a powerful story. When we always know these things with artists will make one project or do one thing, and then, you know, you wonder what happens to an artist, and we never really know the full story. And the stories always, from my experience, a lot of times these stories are more than how we might envision them. And so, for me personally, I love that album. But also through the album, I was exposed to other people, because I didn't get to go see the actual show at Lollapalooza when they toured and they came to Chicago. I had to work, so I couldn't go. But because I was doing promotions for the record, and, you know, through that, they connected me with Walter Mead, who was managing Sha-Key. So we were in contact, and so I was able to go out to their hotel room when they were in town in Chicago just to meet them and talk and kick it. And so I got to meet, Sha-Key was there for sure. Walter was there. That's the day I met High Priest. Rozelle, the godfather of noise, was there. That's how I met Rozelle. We stayed in touch a little bit after this, up to the point even I interviewed him later when he finally put out his own solo record. And also on the road was Jarsiri, another poet MC in 99. And I'm a big fan of 99, but I didn't know any of 99's music then. So I can't even for sure remember if I met 99 that day. But at that time, Sha-Key's like, that was like my best friend. And so, and 99 on that tour was making such a dynamic appearance on stage that the Beastie Boys, who were on so 99 and Sha-Key, Boom Poetic were like a small stage. But Beastie Boys was like a headliner on the main stage. But they caught their show a couple of times, so a few times they were invited on the main stage with the Beastie Boys, you know, later on in the set. In 99, through that, got signed to Grand Royal, Beastie Boys label, and recorded some really dope demos with Gingy Brown. That's like the only way I've heard them because they came out on samplers back then around like 95. These songs were great, but her project never dropped. Later on, she went on to work with Prince and did some demos that are out there on the internet but never officially really came out. She was signed later to a label called V2, which I just did some searching and found out that someone named Kate Hyman worked there. So I'm assuming that's the same person who was the A&R for Sha-Keys. So it looks like Kate later on worked also with 99 on V2. I'm assuming that's the same person. So that was all connected for me working with Sha-Keys. As far as the album itself, there's so many highlights. Children of the Corn, the B-side to the Soulsville 12-inch, like that's one of those like you can really appreciate the beat listening to the instrumental version of it. What are those drums? Like this how he has them tuned, and like the way Rozell's doing the horn, the arrangement. It really speaks to like Earl Blaize just being like, man, really good with what he does, a craftsman. So that one's great. Just like the mood of Doompa Saga, like it's the dark feel of the production, and then like the poetic direction that Sha-Key and High Priest take, and then you got this like hardcore rhyme by Ill Bill, which was how I first heard Ill Bill debuting here on a Sha-Key record. That's a wow moment on the album. Then Blunted Blitz, like that beat, it's like got this like beat with a strong rock feel, but these like jazz moments. I never got to see Sha-Key live, but I feel like that's probably what it felt like to see Sha-Key live, is that song. It's probably capturing it in Blunted. The beat is insane. It's like, you know, Earl Blaize was just like in a great form with what he's doing here, like, and like then when you get to like the song Sha's theme, like just the pairing of Earl Blaize and Sha-Key is magic.
King Sha-Key. It's a mystery to me how MCs can roam free with no style. It's a mystery to me how MCs can roam free with no style. Now it's a mystery to me how MCs can roam free with no style. Meanwhile, it's a mystery to me how MCs can roam free with no style.
There's a song called Into the Center. The beats are like an old school like b-boy break beat. You're hearing it right now in the background because there's no instrumental version of it. I had to grab a few parts of it and make an instrumental version just to use it because that beat is so crazy. I was like a super Earl Blaize fan at this time after hearing this record, and then following later on what he did Anti-Pop Consortium. So like just him as an engineer and a producer, just like a creative, I was tuned into Earl Blaize. And also you got Gingy Brown on there, who I think this is how I first heard Gingy Brown, because around the same time or later he was doing the Supernatural stuff and some other things, but I think I may have first heard Gingy on this. And he does one of my favorite songs on the album, By Coastal Hold Up, is like one of Sha-Key's greatest vocal performance or presence on there is just ridiculous. And you got this like Crash Crew hook. They redo a hook from Crash Crew High Power Rap.
While you're rolling down the street with your wheel in your hand and you're nodding to the music of the Chameleon Clan as you riding in your Jeep down the ghetto streets while you're snapping your fingers to the Gingy Brown beat. So now the whole damn block wants to sound like me, but I'm not down the street with your box in your hand and you playing the music of the Poison Clan, and you walking the pavement of the Sunshine Street and you snapping your fingers to the show.
I remember when I interviewed Sha-Key back around this time, I mentioned that, and she let me know, so, it was actually Gingy's idea to do that. He gave me that hook for that song. So that was his idea to come up with that Crash Crew thing. And then the first part of it, the beat is like this Rozelle with this ill human beatbox beat, and then it like melds into the Dingy Brown beat.
So brothers and sisters, are you ready for the throwdown? I'm rocking from the bottom to the top into the rims. I'm snatching your mic and ripping out your limbs. Still you're knocking on my door, but I can let you in. Watch it, watch it, watch it, watch it, watch it, watch it.
It's a really dope song the way it builds. And then he does also a song called The Story.
It was a hot day on the last spring of April, where showers made flowers and bullets start to bloom. The boom of the Jeep is like a backbeat to the rhymes kicked at the corner against the concrete. Brothers blowing steam to back up what they mean.
It was like a real, like super slow, like, this real super slow feeling song with ill visuals, these dark horns by Rozelle. The beats vibe is crazy. And this song is, man, that song probably could drop today and do way better than it did back then. It was like, they might have been like 15 years too early with The Story, with Dingy Brown and Sha-Key and Rozelle. It was just like, that one still, I think it still sounds great for today. Then the title track with just Rozelle, Neiman beatbox, and Sha-Key just storytelling and just giving like this so much personality. The delivery is top notch, and she's mixing in the spoken word pieces, or I guess it's all kind of a spoken word piece with a hip hop overtone or something. It's just a great combination of a few things in her delivery.
The night was thick like the boom bip of the PE 98 Oldsmobile is sold. Yeah, thick like that. I'm chilling on my back. I'm listening to Bobito. I'm nodding my head to that true school Skizm. And on my TV.
And then the spoken word ending is a masterpiece. Every syllable is said with intention. And every moment in time, every space is like, it feels like it's exactly the way it was meant to be. It's just perfectly phrased.
The boom, the boom, the boom, bip. The boom, the boom, the boom, bip, bip. But then the question still remains, why was I brought here?
Sha-Key's a special talent, and then this is one of those things that an album this great didn't really get the recognition that it should have. At this time, I was still emceeing and doing things, and I was later, a few years later, I'm making this transition to like this new, how I was going to approach rhyming. And I don't know when I noticed it, if it probably wasn't the time, but I noticed it now for sure, that her performance on the title track to the album is like an influence to where I was trying to take it later on too. So Sha-Key was even like a direct vocal influence to me in like my last phase as an MC. And so, yeah, then they had a B-side song called Venture On. It's great. It's therapeutic. It's just like you're at peace.
I flow how I feel. I'm on the search for the real. So I grab my phaser and venture on. Just another cricket on the concrete. But here I come. Here I come. Fresh out the fields on the heels of a recognized real. Not in my head without my neck giving permission. I'm stuck in a rut, too many mutts in the music. But now it's open season, the theme for a pedigree. So just around the corner, here I come, Sha-Key. Now why does everybody beam their eyes on me?
And it's just a shame this album and none of her music from this era, this project, isn't available like online.
Gunning for a rhyme, aiming for a thrill. But fools that can't flow, but in it for the dough. But what you know, fools gold, they know it's gonna glow.
People should hear this album. I think it still sounds great right now. 94, when this album came out, that's also when Jay Bird and I started Caught in the Middle. We did in December of 94, put it out, so this album was already out by that point. December is the time, like I said, is when Imago lost their funding. So as that was happening, Bird and I were starting our magazine, and I wanted to put Sha-Key in there. So we got this writer, Michelle Bell, interview Sha-Key for our debut issue. So fast forward, this album comes out, I work it, I lose touch with Sha-Key. She's not really working with Walter anymore. I stayed with him, touch with him for a little while longer, because he was managing like the rest of the Boom Poetic and Vibe Chameleon. So he was connecting me with what High Priest was doing, and then Anti-Pop and, the Mr. Live stuff, because he was J Live when he rhymed on the Sha-Key album on the Vibe Chameleon's Posse cut, but then he became Mr. Live because there was another J Live who took on his name after that, and rather than have two J Lives, he just changed his name to Mr. Live. So because I talked to Mr. Live about that name change, and so I just lost touch with Sha-Key for a little bit. But then it was like back then it was like an easy way to reach somebody that you could find someone, get the phone number, something like that. So anyway, somehow Sha-Key reconnected with me because she had started Guillotine, and she, what we believe is the first rap magazine on the web, and possibly the first rap website. And at the time, Sha-Key, when I was talking to her a couple weeks ago, was like, yeah, it was just at the time, most people around that Sha knew were like kind of clues to internet, but she was like already knew that it was going to be a thing. So she took the time to learn HTML, taught herself, and then built the site on her own, because she was like, there's no rap online magazine, and I think there should be, and I want to do that. So she created Guillotine Hip Hop, and it was like pushing the limits of HTML at the time, making the post interactive. Like, she remembered a J. Rue interview where she had a logo of a visual of a brain, and then different sections of the brain were different sections of the interview, so the viewer could click into the part of the brain they wanted to visit. So like doing stuff like that. There was like this part called The Link, and The Link was like an online notebook cipher. She used to like have these notebook ciphers where, in public, where you would like write a line or two, a poem in a notebook, pass it over, someone writes a couple of lines, they pass it, and then this cipher is just writing in a notebook, building a piece. And so Sha-Key wanted to create that online, so she had this section on the Guillotine of The Link where that was happening, and it was like really expansive. Once when it was printed out at some point, it was like 100 pages long of these people just building on, and some people like really going into it, writing full verses and going beyond the concept of a few lines, because they were like, the writing was really just coming out of people in this thing. It's one of the things that like Sha-Key's trying to find, those artifacts that were on Guillotine Hip Hop, because they're like artifacts of the first hip hop magazine online, right? I'm assuming most people never even heard of Guillotine, I would guess. So why is that? And then like the answer is obvious and unfortunate, but it's like, she says it like, I was a black queer woman in hip hop, in tech. So I'm really alone in that space, is what she said to me. I'm like, that's the harsh reality. So that's why you may have never heard of Guillotine. Of course, other factors might play into it, like, what limit, she says like her limited knowledge of business at the time, or her personal life at that time, some challenges. So you put all those things together, and that's why it didn't go on to be known and really, really get its accolades that it should have. But there's proof of it, that it exists, because like Vibe magazine did an article that captured that. So like, I was just like a Sha-Key fan beyond the music, just like the innovative way that Sha-Key was doing things with the website. So like we were connected through that stuff. A couple of years later, 98, when the Connected compilation came out, that had some dope groups on it, like Live Tech One, and a few things on there that are dope. But there's that song Ducking Lessons. There's a Sha-Key and High Priest duet. At that point, I'd only heard Priest one more time since the Sha-Key album, and I'd heard this Orientation 12-inch. So then this was my next thing I heard, was Ducking Lessons. And that song makes me wish that Sha-Key and Priest had did a full album together, because like with like Earl Blaize and Priest production, because like that song is great and it has like a great vibe to it. So that was like my favorite song on that compilation. I used to play that on my radio show a lot, Time Travel. So You know, like years later, Earl Blaize and Sha-Key did a follow-up album. They had the Aidi, the Untold Story. That was the album. They started like pretty much right after the debut album, but they left the label. They just didn't pursue a new label. Like, you know, she didn't lift a new label, didn't put no music out for a while. So it kind of developed over a long time. Didn't come out until like 2004. But it was a concept record. It's a hip hop opera, but on her first album, she's already doing that style. So it's just like they're kind of like owning it in this concept record. And it's like this spoken word and abstract album with these great Earl Blaize beats and some awesome features. Mums the Schemer, Scam, Saul Williams. And so like it's a, if you haven't heard that second album, if you haven't heard either album, I think you should seek out both. But if you know, they're both definitely worth a listen for sure. Sha-Key and Earl Blaize are a great team, and this so beyond the music, giving me my first online writing gig. So that's something that I've gone on to do more and more. So that was inspiration is from Sha-Key, and then you know, just the connections that, you know, that door was an opening door for Anti-Pop Consortium, Mr. Live, who like has some great songs with Tony Bones like Hunger Strike, Placebo. So it was like at 99 was a connection through in Rozelle. So there was these few different connections, so a few different levels to how like Sha-Key was like an important icon for me, a person for me in the hip hop music in that 90s era. Sha-Key.
Clear the room if you can't take the boom. Poetic. The night was thick like the boom bip of the PE98 Oldsmobile of soul. Yeah, thick like that. I'm chilling on my back, I'm listening to Bobito. I'm nodding my head to that true school Skizm, and on my TV screen, Speed Racer wins again. Hypnotic bliss is what I was in. I wish I was in the world. The beats and bass lines, mics and dope rhymes. I click my heels 3 times like it's bugging. But then boom, there was a flash of light. Too strong to be my dreams, so yo, I opened my eyes. The original BB up Scotty appeared in my room. My sticky fingers looking good in a hoodie with a beeper by his side. He greeted me in that old school spiritual. He said, so a lot of have greetings from planet that he died. I want to take a ride and follow my stride. But listen here, kid, if I follow from behind, what will I find? Don't let it decide, you know what I'm saying? He said you can't hold it back when you're looking for the line. Just chill, cause hip-hop is a friend of mine. Smacking his lips against the cue stick as he was beamed back up to the mothership. And I'm heading for my G, wondering how this brother gonna do this. And ain't nobody on my block know what was going on. The bodegas was closed, the streets were bad. Nobody in my front stoop doing hair. My 4x4 became an unidentified flying beamer. Mom's always said I'll make it out to projects. So heading out this journey to the other side. Looking up in the sky, I see the mothership in the distance. Yo, I thought I was lifting, cause when I put my Jeep in, yeah, I found myself lifting. Sugar shaft on the planet black, camouflaged amongst the stars. Black, the chance broke through my radar. The drums trembled my ship. It sounded dope, but I couldn't see a thing. Not like Planet Blue, made blue by these white chains and stars surrounding it, pulling at it, tugging at the smiles of his people. Planet Blue, world of the blues. A planet just to be by big bands and big bass and underground. The people gave all they had to jazz gods to show them the way. Miles Bird and Coltrane to whom they praised. The soil was rich like the music, but all that good with different shades of blue. But the people planted jazz and bebop knew how to smile and grit like the funkadelic. Where it orbits its moon, and this moon orbits it. Its president was Clinton, who lived in the House of Parliament with the House of Tom and Dog. Like himself was son of the funk to fight the people with Planet Disco. Planet Disco, we must be closer. Making a left after Second Moon and Sugar Hill. I hear it, I see it, I hear the boom bip in the distance, Planet Adidas. Lights, beats, see the lights, beats, beats, see the lights, beats, see the lights, beats, see the light. The horn wrist of Dougie show welcome me to Aidi. The B-boy army stood in the B-boy stands. The people nodded their head to this ever-present beat. The boom bip was was everywhere. The trees looked like mics rooted in the boom bip. Looking up at the sun, a glowing lottie-dottie record giving energy to the boom bip. The clouds rained, it bounced down, boom bip. The boom bip was everywhere. Each nation nodded a different way, yet they all nodded. The land of the head nodders, the nation of the feline, planet of D-Die, planet of D-Die. What's the point of going home? Beats and bass lines, mics and no rhymes. This is what I want, this is what I need. The boom bip, the boom 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 bip. I said peace to my man on the mothership. The boom, the boom, the boom bip. The boom, the boom, the boom bip bip. But then the question still remains, why was I brought here? Once upon a time in the head of a Naddas, they placed a vision that has since been reality as in real. The real deal of discipline when picking up a pen to ink did not stain the paper in the nature of a true Naddas. Bound too long by the whips of ignorance, pimp slap about the fouls of trends, writing rhymes that make dollars, but no sense. Hence, hip-hop is not a whore to any hoe with the fucked up flow, who adopted the nod just a second ago. So, all aboard those who don't know, make your way to the back where whackness is packed. And all aboard all those who have been nodding for years. I'm riding first class amongst my peers, so shift your third ear in gear. And tell me, do you feel me, feel me, feel me? As you buckle, embrace the fat back of the bass with lyrical grits as your in-flight dish. Oh, how I wish I can go far away, far away. Every few years there comes a search for the real, so grab your phaser. And if you want to take a ride and follow the lines, 'cause it's a head Naddas journey to the other side.
Stony Island Audio.